1945, the Navy launched a warship so massive it couldn't fit through the Panama Canal. But what began as the world's largest aircraft carrier soon became obsolete until a $202 million gamble transformed her, trapping the Navy in a decades-long costly commitment they could never reverse. Why did a single ship become too big to abandon, outlasting entire classes built to replace her? The answer starts with Midway's improbable rebirth. USS Midway entered the world as a giant among warships. Commissioned on September 10, 1945, just days after the guns fell silent in World War II. At 45,000 tons and stretching 972 feet, she eclipsed every carrier before her. Even the Panama Canal couldn't contain her bulk. This was the first American carrier built with a 3.5-inch armored flight deck, a steel shield meant to absorb the worst a kamikaze could deliver. Below, 26 watertight compartments formed a honeycomb of survival, a lesson hammered home by the loss of 4 carriers to torpedoes during the war. Where earlier ships relied on fewer barriers, Midway's designers gave her more than triple the internal subdivision, making her far harder to sink. Power pulsed from engines on par with the mighty Iowa-class battleships, pushing her to 33 knots, fast enough to keep pace with the fleet's spearhead. Her hangar and deck space could handle over 100 aircraft, a number that would only grow with later upgrades. Everything about Midway was built to push boundaries. Electric arc welding trimmed 10% off structural weight, while her elevators and machinery plants set new standards for size and strength. She was ready for the storms and the fire of a new era, a floating fortress that looked unstoppable. Yet, within 20 years, the Navy would question whether this steel giant could keep up with the jet age, a doubt that would set the stage for the most expensive gamble in carrier history. By 1965, the Navy faced a hard truth. Midway's original hydraulic catapults couldn't handle the new generation of jet fighters. The options were clear: scrap her or gamble on a complete transformation. The initial estimate for the overhaul was $87 million, but as months dragged into years, the price tag kept climbing. Shipyard delays, labor shortages, and shifting requirements pushed the final cost to $202 million, almost the same as building a brand new nuclear carrier. The work was staggering in scope. The flight deck grew by 43%, stretching from 2.8 acres to 4 acres, and the angle was widened to 13.5 degrees, the largest ever on a U.S. carrier deck at the time. 3 new steam catapults replaced the old hydraulic systems, tripling the ship's launch capacity overnight. Aircraft elevators were moved to the deck edge and enlarged to handle the heavier jets. Even the fueling system was gutted and rebuilt for the new JP-5 jet fuel, making Midway the first carrier with a fully modern aviation fuel system. But the cost explosion forced a reckoning. The Navy canceled upgrades for her sister ships, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Coral Sea, pouring everything into Midway alone. With $202 million sunk into a single hull, retiring her became unthinkable. The Navy had locked itself into keeping Midway operational, no matter how the technology or the fleet evolved. The gamble had paid for a modernized warship, but also built a financial anchor that would keep her in service, ready for the next test. June 17, 1965. Barely 5 months after her massive rebuild, Midway's F-4B Phantom IIs roared into North Vietnamese airspace. Commander Louis Page and his wingman locked onto 4 MiG-17s south of Hanoi and fired. 2 enemy jets spiraled down, marking the first American air-to-air victories of the Vietnam War. The message was clear: Midway's aging hull could still launch the most advanced fighters in the world, and those fighters could win. 3 days later, the improbable happened again. 4 A-1 Sky Raiders, relics of World War II with propeller engines, tangled with a MiG-17 and shot it down using classic dogfighting tactics. Pilots who learned to fly on piston engines were now outmaneuvering jets, all from the decks of a carrier once considered obsolete. 8 years of combat followed. On January 12, 1973, as the war's final days ticked away, a Midway pilot scored the last air-to-air kill of the conflict, another MiG-17, this time over the Gulf of Tonkin. No other carrier could claim both the first and last MiG kills of Vietnam. Midway's rebuilt deck had become a launchpad for legends, proving her combat value long after others had written her off. April 1975. The South China Sea churned with chaos as Saigon collapsed and helicopters jammed every inch of Midway's flight deck. In the middle of the evacuation, a tiny Cessna circled overhead, piloted by Major Buang Lee, desperate to save his wife and 5 children. With fuel running low, he dropped a handwritten note pleading for a place to land. The order from above was clear: tell him to ditch in the ocean. But Captain Larry Chambers made a different call. He commanded his crew to clear the deck. In minutes, sailors shoved $10 million worth of helicopters overboard, rolling them off the edge one after another. The Cessna touched down, bounced, and skidded to a stop. 7 shaken souls climbed out, alive, because one captain chose rescue over regulation. Midway's mission didn't end with Vietnam. Instead of returning home, she was sent to Yokosuka, Japan, becoming the first United States carrier to be permanently based overseas. For 17 years, her crew called Japan home. Forward deployment meant Midway operated at sea 70% of the time, nearly triple the rate of carriers based in the United States. Whenever Washington debated retirement, her strategic position made her indispensable. The ship that once seemed ready for mothballs was now the backbone of American power in the Pacific. June 20, 1990. A sudden explosion ripped through Midway's engine room, sending fire and smoke clawing up through the decks. Flames burned for 10 hours before the last embers died out. 3 sailors lost their lives. At 45 years old, the ship was already infamous for her wild rolling. Crew called her the rock and roll carrier after a refit left her swaying dangerously in rough seas. Just 2 years before, she rolled a staggering 26 degrees in a typhoon, 2 degrees past her design limit. Now, with charred bulkheads and doubt swirling in Washington, retirement seemed inevitable. But 6 weeks later, Saddam Hussein's tanks invaded Kuwait. The Navy needed every carrier it could get. Midway, battered but unbowed, steamed for the Persian Gulf. On January 17, 1991, at 2 a.m., she launched the first carrier strikes of Operation Desert Storm. Over the next 42 nights, her air wing flew 3,339 combat sorties and dropped 4 million pounds of ordnance without losing a single aircraft. The oldest carrier in the fight became the flagship of the Naval Air Campaign, earning a Navy unit commendation and proving once again that she was the ship that refused to quit. Decommissioning came on April 11, 1992, closing the logbook on 47 years at sea. For a time, Midway's future looked uncertain. Her name struck from the Naval Vessel Register in March 1997, her steel hull facing the same fate as so many ships before her. But San Diego saw something different. By June 2004, the carrier opened her gangway as the USS Midway Museum, moored at Navy Pier. The gamble paid off again, this time with the public. Over 1 million people visit every year, walking the same decks where 225,000 sailors once stood. No longer a warship, Midway became a living monument, preserved not just in steel and paint, but in the memories of all who step aboard. The ship that outlasted generations found a new way to serve, anchoring her legacy in the heart of a city. Midway's story didn't end with the last catapult launch or the final salute. Her decks became a crossroads for generations. 225,000 sailors served aboard, each leaving their mark on the steel and the spirit of the ship. The echoes of their footsteps now mingle with the voices of more than 1 million visitors each year, drawn by a living monument that refuses to fade into history. In May 2022, Hollywood returned to her flight deck for the world premiere of Top Gun: Maverick, a nod to the carrier's place in the American imagination. And in April 2025, Major Buang Lee, now 95, walked the same deck where he once landed his family in a desperate bid for freedom. His return, half a century later, turned a moment of chaos into a symbol of hope, a reminder that Midway's legacy lives on, not just in steel, but in every life she touched. Midway still draws 1 million visitors each year, her decks echoing with stories of survival and reinvention. In an age chasing the next breakthrough, her legacy is a reminder: resilience outlasts innovation. Some icons endure not because they are irreplaceable, but because we refuse to let them be replaced.